In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, President Trump calls out social media again, this time saying the platforms are silencing millions of people. Plus, Autodesk's shift into subscriptions pays off. We'll speak to CEO Andrew Anagnost. And Tim Cook's tenure at Apple, how the tech giant has transformed in the 7 years since he took over as CEO, and who's on the bench. But first to our top story. President Trump is going after the social networks. Early Friday, Trump tweeted, quote, social media giants are silencing millions of people. Can't do this even if it means we must continue to hear fake news like CNN, whose ratings have suffered gravely. People have to figure out what is real, what is not, without censorship. The tweet did not mention any companies by name, but does follow actions taken by Facebook, Twitter, and Alphabet, all of which removed hundreds of accounts tied to alleged state-sponsored propaganda operations. Joining us now to discuss, Brad Stone, head of global tech coverage for Bloomberg. So, Brad, of course, not necessarily surprising to hear this coming from the president amidst all of the other controversies happening, his top advisors flipping on him. We're hearing the word impeachment being used by lawmakers. But what is your reaction to, this latest tweet and the use of the word censorship, which is strong?
A little bit of exasperation. It really conflates two issues. One is the tech companies, trying to facilitate or getting out of the way of honest, free expression on all sides of the political spectrum, right? And the tech companies have not been perfect. Remember in May 2016, when the trending topics on Facebook were seen to be kind of negatively oriented against conservative thought, and Mark Zuckerberg went and met with conservative leaders. And I think, that's one topic. But the other one is the introduction of foreign influenced content onto social media, speech that incites hatefulness or action against minority groups. Alex Jones, the InfoWars guy, has been suspended on all sorts of media platforms. And in this respect, the tech companies are trying to create some simple, basic rules and to enforce them. And I think everyone really, rationally should support that.
And to be clear, preventing foreign interference in U.S. elections is not censorship. In fact, it actually is a crime. So as you say, there's a spectrum of things that are happening here. We did hear from Mark Zuckerberg earlier this week when Facebook revealed that it had shut down hundreds of accounts tied to Iran and hundreds more, an undisclosed number more tied to Russia. We don't know how many. Take a listen to what Zuckerberg had to say on a call with reporters.
It's as important that we focus on building relationships with folks in law enforcement and governments and other companies so that way we can exchange information and find threats, as it is to build up our own capacity to do this in isolation.
So let's talk about issue one, which is that the tech companies have made it clear they can't really do this by themselves. In fact, Facebook acted on a tip from the cybersecurity company FireEye, which led to them discovering all of these accounts. Now we're hearing a report that representatives from Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft are all meeting to coordinate on their election meddling strategy.
Right, long overdue, right? I mean, each of these companies are seeing these attacks. They're going to get together today. They're going to talk about what they've seen, what they're doing, and whether they should make these kinds of meetings routine. Alex Stamos, the former chief security officer of Facebook, he wrote in this on this website Lawfare recently that it might even be too late to save the 2018 election.
He said it would be too late.
Right,
he
crazy,
said it is too late.
Crazy. So, the more that these tech companies and law enforcement can coordinate, share what they're seeing, share best practices, I think the better off that our democracy will be.
So let's talk about the second point, which is, an ongoing issue that these companies are now in the position of deciding what stays and what goes. And it's a very slippery slope. And how do Facebook and Twitter make those decisions on an ongoing basis without getting this heat from all sides, liberal and conservative?
It's a slippery slope, but some of the examples we've seen are not that ambiguous, right? And it's incumbent upon the tech companies.
Do you think Alex Jones is one of those?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that got him suspended from YouTube was saying that his viewers had to go get their battle rifles to combat the media. It's baldly inciting violence. There was the great story recently about how kind of Facebook had not done enough to prevent kind of riots and genocide even in Myanmar, right? And so these basic, acts and content that incite violence, that encourage hatreds. It's not a slippery slope. That's black and white, and the tech companies can do more to keep that off their platform.
The reality is, though, the midterm elections themselves, despite this very long-term issue we're talking about, they're months away. They're months away. So, is it really possible, that a secret meeting between the tech companies is going to get things in order before November?
I mean, it's a good sign, right? They should be meeting. They should be coordinating with law enforcement. I think, we're now over a year from the 2016 elections. We've got really, all the intelligence agencies have agreed that, the Russians did manipulate and interfere with our elections. And I think, this is another sign that the tech companies are taking this very seriously.
All right. Brad Stone, head of Bloomberg Technology, thank you so much for weighing in. Now, to another story we continue to watch. Tesla's third week in the spotlight is coming to an end as Elon Musk propels the company toward a possible rebirth as a private company. On Thursday, we reported Musk hired Morgan Stanley to assist him in the possibility of going private. Morgan Stanley, however, is advising just Musk, not the company, not its board, not a special board committee that's been formed to evaluate the potential take-private proposal. The bank suspended coverage of the stock Tuesday without an explanation. For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg's Dana Hull, who, of course, covers Tesla. So, Dana, what do we read into this Morgan Stanley hire?
Well, remember that Goldman Sachs is also advising Elon Musk. So Elon now has sort of the top two investment banks in his corner as he, gets ready to, I guess, put forward an actual proposal to the board, which no one has seen yet. So, there's a lot of different factions now. There's Musk himself, who is the CEO, chairman, and largest shareholder. There's Tesla, the company. There's Tesla's board of directors. And then there's the special committee of the board that has been assembled to kind of evaluate any real proposal from Musk if and when he puts one forward. So what's happening now is that you've got PR firms, lawyers, banks, all kind of like lining up to get a piece of the action, because no matter which way this goes, there's money to be made on all sides.
Right, absolutely. Fees to be made no matter what happens. What are actual next steps we should expect to see in this very unexpected scenario?
Well, we have not seen any kind of real proposal from Elon Musk about his go private plan and who the funders are. I mean, he tweeted about it, he wrote a blog post, but that's like very different from, perhaps a detailed financial plan that Tesla would then maybe issue an 8K about. I mean, he's got to put forward a real plan. Obviously, I think he's brought in bankers to help him write one. But I mean, that would be the next obvious step, a real plan. And everyone keeps asking, why hasn't the board hired a bank? Well, I mean, they're probably talking to banks, but there's nothing to evaluate yet. I mean, there's no real proposal yet. So that's really what everyone is waiting for. And, in the interim, I mean, there's not a lot of hard news right now. There's just a lot of speculation. And, the next step is a real proposal from Musk.
So how long could we expect this process to take, no matter what the endpoint is?
I mean, he can sort of do this on whatever timeline he sees fit, right? I mean, at one point there was, some rumor that they want to get this done quickly before they have to report third quarter earnings. But what is the rush? I mean, the stock is kind of remarkably resilient in terms of share price. Some investors don't want him to go private. There's a lot of questions about how it'll happen, but I imagine that it could go quite slowly. I mean, there's not like a timeline on it. I mean, this is basically his company and he can do whatever he wants.
Now, talk to us a little bit about what we know about the SEC inquiries. We had a former SEC attorney on earlier this week who said it's pretty clear from her perspective that there are multiple investigations going on into Tesla, given how quickly the SEC has moved. That's now an outside observer's perspective. But what do we know about the progress and the enforcement that the SEC could take here?
Well, I think that, my understanding is that, the SEC, when they investigate a company, they often have simultaneous inquiries or investigations going on about more than one thing. So as our reporters in Washington figured out, there was one, the SEC was already sort of looking at Tesla and at company statements. Then the tweet happened, and that kind of spurred them to look more closely. I don't know whether those two things have converged or whether they're still on separate tracks, but, apparently subpoenas have been issued. We don't know which executives have been interviewed, but there were interviews that were supposed to happen this week. And, Tesla is a big target for an agency like the SEC. And so it's kind of like, if you come at the king, you best not miss, right? So I think that I imagine that they're still investigating. I just don't know the scope and what else they could be looking at as they uncover things.
Dana, most of the analysts we have talked to say there's zero chance of this going private thing actually happening. Have you talked to anyone else who says otherwise, who says, actually, yes, this is a very realistic option, here is how?
I think it'll be. It's hard. It's really hard to say. I mean, I guess I would just recall that when Musk proposed buying SolarCity, everyone thought that was bananas and would never happen, and it ultimately passed with 85% of shareholders saying yes. So it really is a question of Tesla's IR team and what big investors does he have in his pocket. I mean, if he, can flip some big shareholders and convince some of his personal friends to go along with him. I mean, there might be a way to do it. SpaceX seems to be the template of what he would like to do. I just think the question is also, what are the limits of the big shareholders in terms of their ability to actually go private? But he's a very determined guy, and now that he has sort of made his intentions public, there will be huge egg on his face if he can't pull it off. So I think he's lined up Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley to help him figure this out and to line up the investors that would need to make it happen.
And have you spoken to any current Tesla employees about how they feel about this? Like, are they upset that they could lose their flexibility around liquidity?
I think people just want to know, what does it mean for them in terms of their stock options? You have RSUs, you have options, they vest in certain tranches. How is that going to change? But SpaceX is a very popular program too, where SpaceX employees do have options that trade on the secondary market, and they're able to sell them during different liquidity events. So I don't think people are like in a panic about it. I just think that the whole go private timeline is up in the air, and people want to know what it's going to mean for them. I mean, for Tesla employees, stock compensation is a big part of their overall package. And the Bay Area is a really expensive place to live, so they just want to know, what's going to happen with that.
Indeed it is. All right, Bloomberg's Dana Hall, thank you as always, and for your continued reporting on this developing story. Coming up, Autodesk is showing progress converting customers to subscribers. We'll speak to Autodesk's CEO about the company's recent earnings report next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Autodesk climbed to a record high Friday after its second quarter earnings report, and forecasts gave analysts at RBC Capital Markets and Oppenheimer confidence to lift their price targets for the stock, citing the company's transition and subscriber growth. Andrew Anagnos, CEO of Autodesk, joins me now here in the studio. So why do you think investors are so excited?
Well, there's a couple of things that people are excited about. They love seeing the ARR growth, the annualized recurring revenue growth. It's up 28%. And it's the kind of thing that they were expecting to see as we were moving into this side of the transition. Remember when you're in the front end of a transition, everything's going this way. And now we're in the side where everything's going this way. And people are seeing the results they expect to see. And it's actually giving us some room to talk about what we're trying to do with the company long term, and not just the move to subscription.
Right. So as you complete the move to subscription and you get more customers converted, where is that long-term growth going to come
from? The exciting thing that's going to be happening for the company in this new age of automation is we're moving from being a design software company to be a design make automation provider. So we're going to be getting much more into our customers' make processes, their construction processes, their manufacturing processes, their film production processes. And that's really the exciting long-term opportunity for the company. And it's fueled by the subscription transition, but it's also fueled by the new cloud-based age of machine learning and automation that we're all wandering into right now. It's very exciting.
Speaking of, we had one of your employees on the show a few months ago to talk about Ava, this female AI that Autodesk has been working on, that's being integrated or planning to be integrated into more of your software. This is an AI that can analyze facial expressions, and supposedly, you advertise it can detect emotions. What is the progress on this?
Yeah, and that's a customer-facing application that helps our customers actually do things with our products. It's not actually built into the products. It's just how we interact with our customers. And frankly, the way it's designed for the processes that we're using it for, it's actually increasing customer satisfaction. I mean, we've all had interactions with chatbots, right? And
yes.
Sometimes you just want to find out which button gets you off the chatbot.
Sometimes it's creepy,
yes,
and sometimes it's very inconvenient.
And you just want the person thing. This particular one, we targeted targeted it so tightly to a particular problem customers were having and that they'd call us about, that satisfaction scores actually went up. So that piece is working, but that's just the tip of the iceberg and things we can automate for our customers.
What do you think about the sort of backlash to these kind of AIs and that people want true human connection, and they are still going to physical stores in order to get that connection, even though, yes, e-commerce is booming and will continue to grow? Yeah,
so we're automation optimists. We're actually machine learning optimists about where the future is going. We believe that the AI and the machine algorithms and all these things you're seeing, they're best when they facilitate collaboration between human beings. And when we look at what we're trying to do with our software, we're trying to move away from having software talk to you and more facilitate interdisciplinary connections, like between architects and construction managers and architects and building planners and architects and owners. This is where we believe the real power is, because yes, people want the human connection, and they also want to know their role as human beings is a really important part of the process.
So you're not worried about the apocalyptic future that Elon Musk warns about with the coming of AI?
I have a great deal of respect for Elon. However, I disagree with him on the apocalyptic future. I think he's read too much dystopian science fiction. I read the same science fiction. I just see the world differently. We see AI as solving a fundamental capacity problem in the world. And that capacity problem is our built world. You know what Autodesk does. We work with people that build buildings, products, roads. Do you think we can do enough of that right now? Do you think we're effective, efficient enough at that? No. People need to do more, and they need to do it a lot better and with a lot less negative impact on the world. We think AI is going to help us do that, not destroy jobs. It's actually going to create a whole new climate and class of jobs.
What about M&A? How much will that be part of your strategy going forward?
We've always been an acquisitive company. And when you look at what we're trying to do, where we're trying to be number one in the construction space, move more deeply into the world of advanced and digital manufacturing, we're absolutely going to be looking at all options as we move forward. It's just who we are.
What areas would you be interested in?
Construction is first and foremost the area we're looking at right now. We just bought a company called Assemble, which helped reinforce the pre-construction planning part of our portfolio. We'll always be looking at opportunities.
And what about, we've been talking about election meddling, we've been talking about increased cybersecurity concerns as everything goes to the cloud and hackers around the world become more and more sophisticated. What are you doing to safeguard yourself and your clients against that?
Yeah, look, security and the security of the data and the preservation of the data, and frankly, privacy is a big deal for us. I mean, this whole discussion we're having right now around privacy, around Facebook, this is something I've been passionate about for 5 years. I think Silicon Valley is at its best when it treats its end users as its customers, not its products. And as we start moving away from this, you're my product and I can do something with you and sell you to other people, and start moving to a mindset where, no, you're my end user and I have to satisfy you, we're going to get past some of these concerns, because uniform privacy laws for all of us, I think, are going to level the market and actually accelerate innovation, not hold it back.
But Facebook's business model is fundamentally based on selling our information.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for them, isn't it? Yeah.
That's not going to change.
I think one of the things that we need to look at, and this is a hot button for me, it's something I'm passionate about, this whole end user as customer. If we start looking at uniform privacy laws, we'll start leveling the playing field about which business model is successful. Look at Apple. What has Apple done? Apple, they basically sell small micro subscriptions for everything. I happily give my money to Apple for every little micro. I've lost track of how many micro subscriptions I have with Apple. And I'm not concerned about it, because I like the ecosystem they've created where they're providing value back to me, they treat me as the customer, and they don't sell me.
Right.
I think what Europe has done with GDPR is partly right. There's a little bit of anti-American tech companies in there, but we should do that everywhere.
Hard to believe that 2 billion users are going to pay for Facebook, but Facebook is exploring it. Andrew Anagnos, CEO of Autodesk, thank you so much for stopping by. We'll have to have you back to talk about this more.
Thank you.
Coming up, the future of fintech is in mobile payments, and China has become the epicenter of cashless technology. Details on this next. This is Bloomberg. In China, you can pay for almost anything with a phone, and almost everyone does. The country made almost $9 trillion worth of transactions on mobile devices in 2016. For the first report in a series for the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, Bloomberg takes a closer look at its cashless society.
Sophia Zheng won't leave the house without one very important accessory, her smartphone.
我现在平时用不到钱包，出门也不会带钱包，但是我一定会带手机。
Sophia takes a taxi to the office, orders breakfast and lunch. After work, she jumps on a train, calls in her dinner, and pedals home from the station. She pays for it all using her smartphone.
现在几乎没有移动支付买不到的东西。我觉得我现在已经过上了无现金的生活方式。
Mobile payments in China surged 382% in 2016 compared to 2015. Transactions were worth almost $9 trillion. And most of these transactions were made using apps and payment platforms owned or backed by China's two tech giants, Alibaba and Tencent. Every month, more than 1 billion people use Alipay and WeChat Pay for simple transactions, like buying street food, and more complex deals, like taking out a personal loan. Financial technology is eating into the business of traditional state-owned banks.
The growth of mobile payment in China reflect the underdevelopment of the traditional financial institution in China, because there are so many people are either underbanked or no bank services.
State-owned banks are alarmed. They're making their online banking apps more user-friendly and dropping some fees.
They are also picking up very fast because there's almost no barrier in terms of technologies.
But the Chinese central bank is also complaining that a cashless society threatens deposits and fees. In July, China urged consumers and businesses not to refuse cash. Then in early August, it fined Alipay $600,000 for breaching rules. But Alipay is one step ahead. It launched a chain of stores in 2017 where, not surprisingly, mobile payment is encouraged and cash is not.
现在在国内，尤其是在上海的话，它整体的一个手机支付的占比非常非常的高，非常非常的普及。所以的话，我们基本上95%以上的顾客都会选择用手机进行支付的。
While China is no doubt the #1 cashless market in the world, there are still places in the country where cash is king, like traditional farmers' markets.
Coming up, protecting the midterms. One former Facebook exec says it's too late to save 2018. Is he right? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Now to our continuing look at securing the upcoming U.S. midterm elections. On Friday, Facebook organized a secret meeting of tech giants in an attempt to devise a strategy ahead of November's vote. That is according to an email obtained by BuzzFeed. The companies include Twitter, Google, Microsoft, and Snap. They plan to discuss what they've done to prevent misinformation and meddling leading up to the midterms. And this past Wednesday, Facebook's former head of security sounded the alarm, saying it is already too late to save 2018's election. Writing on the Lawfare blog, he said, in some ways, the United States has broadcast to the world that it doesn't take these issues seriously and that any perpetrators of information warfare against the West will get, at most, a slap on the wrist. While this failure has left the U.S. unprepared to protect the 2018 elections, there is still a chance to defend American democracy in 2020. So, is he right? I want to get straight to New York, where Lawrence Norden, the deputy director of NYU's Brennan Center for Justice, is standing by. He recently co-authored the report, Better Safe Than Sorry, How Election Officials Can Plan Ahead to Protect the Vote in the Face of a Cyber Attack. So, Larry, do you think it's too late for 2018?
I definitely don't think it's too late. There's a lot that we could be doing ahead of this November to protect our elections. I think it's important when we're talking about this concept of foreign interference on our elections to distinguish between three related but really separate issues. One is disinformation, information warfare on social media. That's what a lot of the focus I'm sure is in the meeting between Facebook and Google and these other groups. Second is attacks on cyber attacks against campaigns and think tanks. We've seen that recently in the news. And then there's attacks on our election infrastructure, things like voter registration systems, voting machines, electronic poll books. And particularly in the last area, there's a lot that we could be doing in the next 75 days before the election to make sure that we can protect the vote.
So, you mentioned registration systems, poll books, voting machines, election night reporting. You say that there are failures in all of these in every election, but in a cyber attack, these failures would be more widespread, so we need a contingency plan. What is that contingency plan?
So you're exactly right. No election is perfect. There are always flaws, and the key is going to be to make sure that every jurisdiction is prepared this time. And election officials do have a lot of experience with contingency planning. But I'll give you an example. You show up to the polls, and somebody is checking you in. In 33 states, it's with what's called an electronic poll book. That's a tablet or a computer. Now, that computer might not be working. That tablet might not be working when you show up. That could be a failure. It could be part of a cyber attack. The key is going to be, what do officials do then to make sure that you can vote? We've seen hours-long lines in the past. What we want to make sure is that there's a paper backup of that electronic poll book. It sounds simple, but in 10 states they don't have that paper backup right now, so that they can still check you in. Similarly, when you go to vote on the voting machine, is it working? Are there problems with it? We want to make sure that there are emergency paper ballots for you to fill out in case they have to take time to fix those machines or to get replacement machines. That's really the key.
Okay, but you have Alex Stamos, the former security head at Facebook, saying, Russia has effectively given every other country a playbook on how to do this. Now we know Iran is doing it as well. Who's to say that China, North Korea, and other countries aren't already doing this as well? If best practices were actually in place in November, would that be enough?
I think for protecting the vote, making sure that people can vote and that at the end of the day, we can count those votes accurately. I do think being prepared is what is really critical right now. We only have 75 days left. So I think the point that Alex was making in that piece was that big structural changes probably not going to happen in the next 75 days. But if what we're concerned about is making sure that even if there is a breach of the system, that everybody can still vote, we find a way that everybody can still vote, and that afterwards we're able to count those votes accurately, that is certainly possible, and that's really what we should be focused on. That's what election officials are focused on in the next 75 days, and I think we all have a part to play in that, by the way.
That said, we've learned that Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, Snap are having this secret meeting, reportedly, to coordinate on their strategies to combat election meddling, to talk about what they're doing. How do you think these companies, what can they do to be stronger together?
Well, something that the Brennan Center, where I work, has called for a long time is better industry, uniform industry standards around this. And in particular around paid political ads. Foreign powers should not be purchasing political ads. That's illegal. So if we're moving closer to industry-wide standards in this space, I think that's a good thing. I think one of the things that Facebook in particular was rightly criticized for was being fairly slow in investigating and then copping to what they were finding. And so having rapid investigations when they're discovering stuff and being transparent about what they're finding and what they're doing, it would be great to see, and it would be great to see across these platforms. So if they can agree to that would be wonderful.
What more do you think Congress and states should be doing?
Well, right now, there is a bill in Congress, the Secure Elections Act, that would, particularly around election infrastructure and securing that election infrastructure, would go a long way towards increasing cybersecurity for that election infrastructure. It has bipartisan support. I'd like to see that bill move. Senator Klobuchar, a Democrat, and Senator McCain, as folks know, a Republican, have something called the Honest Ads Act that would start to regulate paid political ads on the internet the same way that we do on broadcast TV and print. That's another really important step. So there are definitely actions that Congress can take. It shouldn't be breaking down along partisan lines, where we can protect ourselves from foreign meddling in our elections.
So let's move ahead to 2020. Beyond the next 75 days, what are some longer-term things that the private and public sector can and should be doing to make sure we are ready by 2020?
Yeah, well, one of the big things that I'm very focused on is starting to really invest in securing election infrastructure. So we've got 13 states still that use paperless voting systems. Virtually everybody agrees that we should have some kind of paper backup. Secretary Nielsen of the Department of Homeland Security said again yesterday that she wants to make sure before 2020 we have auditable systems in every single jurisdiction. That costs money. So investing to make sure that we replace those systems, that we have paper backups, that we're auditing those paper backups. We're taking the paper that at this point 80% of the country is voting on, and we're using it to check the software, because at the end of the day what we have are software totals telling us who won and lost elections. Those are fairly straightforward, simple things that I think we can get done before 2020, and just starting to think that there is a shared federal, state, and local responsibility for funding the security of our elections. This is a national security issue.
All right, Lawrence Norton of NYU's Brennan Center for Justice. We're going to be talking about what is happening over the next 75 days. Thank you so much for your recommendations and your input. Sticking with election news, Lyft wants to make sure that people have rides to get to their polling places on November 6th. The ride-hailing company says it's working with nonpartisan nonprofits to offer free and discounted rides to polling places. Underserved communities will have free rides, while across the country, Lyft is offering half-off trips to get people out to vote. Coming up, is tech responsible for slow wage growth? We head to Jackson Hole to find out next. Plus, who will be Apple's next? Tim Cook will take a look at who's on Apple's bench. Coming up, this is Bloomberg.
Presidential pardons are all the rage right now, and people want to know why, and what it might mean for the future of Donald Trump's presidency. I'm Eric Larson, and I'm a legal reporter for Bloomberg News in New York. Question 1. Why are pardons arising as an issue for Trump? Because two criminal investigations, special counsel Robert Mueller's probe into Russian meddling and a federal probe in New York into Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen, have reached the president's inner circle. On August 21st, Cohen pleaded guilty to crimes including campaign finance violations. A federal jury almost simultaneously convicted Trump's former campaign chairman Paul Manafort of fraud charges relating to actions he took years before he joined the campaign. Both cases amplified Trump's legal peril because either man could, in theory, seek to offer incriminating evidence on Trump in a bid to get a lesser sentence. And Trump has made clear his interest in pardons, doling out several to people unrelated to his campaign. In a 2017 letter, his legal team reminded Mueller of the president's right to pardon anyone before, during, or after an investigation or conviction. Question 2. Are Cohen and Manafort seeking pardons? Not publicly, if at all. Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, says his client wouldn't accept one if offered. And unlike Cohen, Manafort stood up to federal prosecutors and fought them in court rather than cooperate in Mueller's probe, prompting Trump to tweet that Manafort is a brave man. Manafort still faces a second trial on additional charges next month. Trump could paint a pardon of Manafort as his ultimate statement of defiance against Mueller's probe, which he calls a witch hunt. Question 3. Could Trump pardon himself? Experts point to legal advice given to President Richard Nixon in 1974 in connection with the Watergate scandal. Under the fundamental rule that no one may be a judge in his own case, the president cannot pardon himself, it said. That advice hasn't ever been tested in court. Trump's own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said Trump pardoning himself would be unthinkable and would likely lead to attempts to remove him from office. I'm Eric Larson for Bloomberg News in New York. You can follow me on Twitter at @EELarson, and you can get all your updates at TikTok.
This week in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the annual symposium of bank officials is underway. One thing they're looking at is how technology is changing the economy and the workforce. Bloomberg's Michael McKee sat down with Chad Syverson, economics professor at the University of Chicago, to measure the tech effect.
Markets are changing in a pretty systematic way. We see more and more concentration of activity within industries with just a few firms. There's a lot of discussion about what that means, about market power, about changes in technology and how industries are going to evolve from here forward, what that means for inflation and things like that.
Well, is it good or bad that we're seeing this kind of concentration?
It can be either. So concentration can be related to an increase in market power, monopoly power, which can depress investment, harm consumers, raise prices. But on the other hand, changes in technology that make it easier for companies to attain scale, or things that affect markets that make it easier for customers to find their most preferred seller, will also create increases of concentration. But we would think of those things as, beneficial evolutions in the industry and the market.
Obviously, the Fed wants to learn more. Do regulators understand this new world?
I think they understand the two stories, that it could go either way. I think we're all a little still in the dark about what it actually is. I mean, some people have strong feelings one way or the other. I think the evidence at this point is still pretty mixed and the jury is out. But I think regulators realize that by and large.
Bill Gates wrote recently that software is one area where people really don't get what's going on because the marginal cost of production after your first unit is essentially zero.
Yeah, so that's an example of a technological change that would make it easier for companies to get really large, because once you've developed the software, you can make as many copies of it as you want at no additional cost. So you might not be surprised in a market like that one company can take over a substantial share of the market, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a bad thing if they then use that favored position to keep out new entrants, new products, and I think that's where the antitrust policy angle becomes important.
Well, do we see that happening from this concentration? Are consumers better off, worse off at this point? People point to this concentration as one reason we don't see wages rising.
That's definitely something that's being discussed. Again, I think the evidence is kind of mixed on that. It could be either way. I think time will tell, and we need to look a little more closely at the issue, especially with wages. I think that's something that's been on a lot of people's minds lately.
Well, you've said that we live in an age of paradox. We've got rapid advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and yet measured productivity growth is half of what it used to be. Can we understand what's going on?
Yes, I think the best possible explanation for that is we're in a period where a new technology has come along. Companies are trying to figure out how to use it. People can sort of sense the potential of it, but actually harnessing that potential takes a lot of time, effort, restructuring, takes additional investments, retraining. All of that takes up resources during a period. So you're going to have a period of slow productivity growth where you're allocating resources towards trying to set up for the new technology, but you're not yet seeing the benefits of that new technology. Some co-authors of mine, Dan Rock and Eric Nielsen, and I have been exploring this story in a recent study. And we think this is the best explanation for this juxtaposition of slow productivity growth, but optimism about new technologies.
Well, you mentioned Eric. He was here a couple of years ago and said the same thing that you said. So when does that happen?
Well, if you look in history at similar sort of introductions of these big technologies, it can actually take a decade or more. So if you look at, say, the introduction of the electric motor into manufacturing or early computers into business, that took 15, 20 years in some cases really to get to the point where you actually saw the productivity benefits of those new technologies showing up in the productivity statistics.
Well, you've got slow productivity and you've got low wages. Which is the cause, which is the effect?
That's another good question that can go either way. I think certainly there's something to the issue of slow productivity growth is causing slow wage growth. Whether it's going the other way also, I think, is there's some evidence for it, but it's not quite clear.
So to bring it back to the topic of the conference here, do we see a change in that? Do we see, with growing market power of some companies, do we see the investment from them? Do we see the incentive for them to invest if they have the power to control markets anyway?
Yeah, and actually, so one of the things I think that people will be talking about here is what is the relationship between the changes in market structure and investment? How's that related to technology? Is it about market power, or is it about a different kind of investment that we're not good at measuring? How's that related to wages? I think that's going to be a big topic of discussion this weekend.
Chad Syverson of the University of Chicago speaking with Bloomberg's Michael McKee from Jackson Hole. Well, Google is taking another step on the road to getting back into China, and this time it involves parent company Alphabet setting up a Waymo subsidiary there. The self-driving car project has set up a unit in Shanghai that will focus on testing and logistics. The move comes after Google confirmed it is working with the Chinese government to create a censored search engine for use in China. Google left China in 2010 over censorship concerns. Coming up, it takes a village to run Apple, but beyond. CEO Tim Cook, who are the other faces of the tech giant that we may not know as well? We'll discuss next. And this weekend on Bloomberg Television, we'll bring you all our best interviews from the week, including our conversation with Microsoft President and Chief Legal Officer Brad Smith after the company said it found and seized bogus websites created by Russian hackers. Tune in this Saturday for the best of Bloomberg technology. This is Bloomberg. Well, it's Tim Cook's 7th anniversary as Apple's CEO. But behind the face of the company, over 100 executives help run it from outside the limelight. Cook has said that passing the baton is one of his most crucial responsibilities. Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman took a look at 15 of Apple's lesser-known but highly influential executives. Mark joins us now from LA. So, Mark, let's start with Tim Cook. We know he has a pay package that vests fully in 2021, but there's no signs that Tim Cook is going anywhere. How long do we expect him to stay?
He's 57 years old, and he seems like Apple is everything he cares about. He's mentioned it many times that some people have said that Apple is his entire life. He runs the ship, even though it's not a one-man shop, so I could see him being there for the next, decade plus, right? He's only 57 years old. Public company CEOs typically retire around retirement age of 70, but some go longer, some go shorter. Apple obviously has always been a unique company in that respect, so it's really up in the air.
So who are the other faces of Apple that we need to know? Who could potentially be next in line?
That's a good question. So to step back, basically at the top of Apple, there's 3 organizational rows. There's Tim Cook on top, along with the board of directors, which he reports to. And then he has a group of about 10 senior vice presidents. That includes, Phil Schiller, Jonathan Ive, their general counsel, Kate Adams, Angela Ahrendts, the head of retail. But the 2 people to focus on that top shelf are really Phil Schiller, who's the head of marketing, who really was symbiotic with Steve Jobs in returning Apple to the company that we know it is today, as well as Jeff Williams, the chief operating officer. So if anything were to happen in the imminent future, it would likely go to one of those 2. But below that row of senior VPs are dozens of vice presidents that report to those people.
Jeff Williams, of course, the COO, just as Tim Cook was the COO who took over for Steve Jobs. Talk to us about the female executives on the bench.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Angela Ahrendts, the head of retail, she was the CEO of Burberry through the beginning of 2014 before joining Apple. She has a very high profile. Some people have considered her a potential eventual successor to Tim Cook, given her previous public company CEO experience. There's Kate Adams, who is their new general counsel as of last year, so handling all legal duties. Obviously, we've seen the situation with Samsung in recent months, so she's been at the forefront of that. Isabel G. Mahi, she runs China operations for Apple. There's a few marketing executives such as Susan Prescott, who are very high level on the services side. Jennifer Bailey, she runs Apple Pay. So lots of very important women at Apple at the top.
Meantime, of course, and I have this chart in my GTV library showing the progress of Apple's market cap, of course, crossing that $1 trillion mark, which is a huge milestone and a huge accomplishment for Tim Cook himself. You know, he has said that passing the baton is important and that they talk about succession. You know, what do we know about those discussions, you know, assuming that even if it's not going to happen imminently, that they do discuss what would happen years from now?
Right, so we have a pretty good idea that they have a plan what would happen tomorrow if, you know, Tim Cook stepped off the wrong curb. They have a plan if he needed to step down in the immediate future, but I'm sure they also have a 5, 10, and 15-year plan for CEO succession. Remember, this is the biggest company in the world. There's no excuses for them not to have a succession plan. They plan everything in such fine-grained detail, from, you know, the pieces of paper they put in the Apple Store to indicate the prices to what goes deep in their devices. So it's not hard to believe that they think the same way for succession planning, especially in the CEO role.
All right, well, great piece from you, Mark Gurman, if you're interested in some of those lesser-known faces of Apple. Mark, as always, thank you so much for stopping by. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. That is all for now. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday.